Welcome back. Some of you may be wondering how the transition between SOC to IR may happen. If that is the case, you're lucky. Luke and Sean are going to explain to us precisely their experience about how to transition between SOC to IR. Enjoy the talk.
So, hello everyone, my name's Luke. I currently work for CYSIAM as a senior technical consultant. And today I'm going to be taking you through a presentation simply called SOC to IR, Am I Ready? So the overall premise of this really is you're a SOC analyst, you're not too sure what your next progressional step is. And maybe you thought about going into an incident response team, but you're not too sure what that might involve, what might be expected of you. And you might have a lot of doubt about your own potential and what you could actually do. So some things that we'll run through. So, you want to move into an IR team, you're unsure whether you have the actual skills, what kind of work you'll do outside of the incidents, because not all of your time obviously is going to be filled with incidents. No one could sustain that really. There's probably a common question in there as well about whether you'll work every weekend and Friday afternoon. And then another concern amongst most people is, what if I freeze during an incident and I'm not too sure what to do? What kind of support can I call on? But the jump from being a SOC analyst to moving to an incident response team member mixed in with consultancy work isn't as bad as you might think it is, and you're more than likely ready to make that jump. So let's get moving. So a bit about the presenters. There's myself, Luke Price, and Sean O'Connor, who will be answering questions on the Q&A day for any concerns or questions you have on the day. So a bit about myself here. Senior technical consultant at CYSIAM. I primarily work in the incident response team, so doing the firefighting, going to client sites and trying to save the day, as it were. So within CYSIAM itself, there's an encompassing idea that we have cyber defense operations. So traditionally in most services, you might have a penetration testing team, a team that does compliance, and a team that does governance. Oh, let's go back. Accidentally clicked the wrong one there. So carrying on here. So within CYSIAM, we'll have multiple departments as we normally would. So penetration testing, focused staff, governance, and all of that mix. But it's all very intertwined. So it's not siloed as you only really do this. There's a mix of things that you do. So even though I'm primarily in the incident response team, if I wanted to turn my hand at penetration testing and I had the capability to do so, we could. And this dynamic means that we all collaborate and connect with each other and talk about different things and help ourselves get through different problems, which is great because it means more exposure for myself and the people in the business, right? You're not just doing that one set thing all the time. So a little bit about my path, just so it's a bit more relative to the SOC analyst or any other technical person out there wanting to actually get into incident response. So initially I joined the British military, spent some time in the signals, did quite a few cool things there. Left the military after about 5 years, 6 months, and joined OpenReach as an engineer, climbing telegraph poles, visiting people's houses and installing broadband. Well, that was fun for some time, but I wanted to get into the more deeper technical things within the technology sector. So I joined Internet and spent some time there as a technical support analyst. So essentially dealing with common ISP problems, broadband, DNS, that type of thing. And then moved to MPS networks as an engineer. So doing a lot of configuration, a lot of troubleshooting, turning up to sites where the network had burnt down, and it's up to me to try and fix it. And that really started to get me interested in technology, mostly because of the in-depth scope I had to look at different protocols within tools like Wireshark and see how they work and how things kind of connect. And obviously networking kind of underpins a lot of what we do, though it's often neglected in the industry. It's essentially the bridge by which every other mechanism still needs to talk to, whether that's endpoints or servers, applications, web servers. It all still needs to go through a network of some kind. So my time spent at MPS gave me a really solid grounding within networking. From that point there, I completed a Cisco scholarship for one of their new certifications to get into cybersecurity, and that's how I ended up at CRESTCon as a security analyst, performing a lot of great work there, mostly working with a load of clients, loads of different tools, and so forth. And then moved to context information security as a security analyst. Spent quite a bit of time there, about 1 year, 9 months. Again, doing a similar thing, monitoring alarms, creating security content. Just getting into the bread and butter of being a SOC analyst within a SOC. Obviously, you can see there's multiple SOC roles there. And then moved into a more of a consultancy type role when Accenture bought context information security and started working on some big projects there, which I hadn't really done before. But the consultancy work did give a nice exposure for me in the industry. And now here I am at CYSIAM, working as a senior technical consultant, again, primarily focused on incident response. But if I can turn my hands at many different things, then I will do that, whether that be penetration testing, architecture reviews, and all of that kind of thing, really. So just to give you an idea of my background and how I've kind of transitioned. So at a high level overview, essentially there's a heavy support desk background, heavy SOC analyst background, a bit of consultancy, and then essentially moving into incident response. So imagine you're a SOC analyst sitting on your night shift. Imagine this picture here is you doing some Python, as it were, and you're not sure what your next security role might be or what that might involve. Then most SOC analysts tend to think about incident response consultant roles. It's a natural progression path usually. Most SOC analysts tend to go into incident response, but then there's probably a lot of self-doubt and even imposter syndrome as to whether you think you're ready to move into that type of role and what it could involve. Do I have the right skills? Do I have the experience? Will I freeze during incidents? There's a lot of concern and doubt that could arise from the thoughts that you have. So what we'll cover first will essentially be the skill sets and the expectations on them, really, and what you might need. So I like a bit of imagery, and there we've got the unicorn in a vast ocean. And you might be wondering, well, why the hell have you got that unicorn picture on there? That's because most people like unicorns, except they don't exist and never will. So when you're looking at job descriptions for an IR role as a security analyst, and you're looking at the skills that are on there, and there's loads of them. Some of them are obscure, some of them are really common. And what you shouldn't do is look at those lists and think that this is a definitive list of everything that I need, because you aren't a unicorn, and the people trying to get that role will never have all of those skills. It's just not going to happen. And obviously this creates a problem whereby you have SOC analysts looking at the requirements, whether that be moving laterally within a company or moving to a different company altogether. They won't think that they've got the aptitude there to actually move and progress. A strong grasp of fundamental skills will carry you a long way. So if you are looking at job specs, make sure that you do have a lot of the skills on there, but you don't need all of them. You just need a solid grounding, which will carry you a long way within incident response itself. So what are those foundational skills and what they look like? So here we have a lot of randomness going on. We've got a lot of images of certs, tools, and different technologies. And some descriptions of jobs might ask for a lot of this type of stuff, but in reality, you don't need a lot of it. You might be wondering, well, okay, you showed us the unicorn. Well, what's the bulldozer all about? Now, imagine the bulldozer is at the top of a mountain and you're at the bottom of the mountain starting out, whether that be as a SOC analyst or an incident response consultant. And as you're climbing that mountain, you're learning different technologies. You might be learning about AWS, Cisco technologies. You might be using Linux to perform malware analysis. But as you're climbing that mountain, that bulldozer is throwing boulders at you, knocking you off track, whether that be physically or emotionally. And what that means is that that bulldozer is always going to be at the top of the mountain, and you'll never really get to the top, especially in this industry, because of the breadth of the topics and subjects that you need to understand. It's just not going to happen. So you need to be comfortable knowing that you won't know everything, but as professionals, we'll do our best to learn as much as we can, right? So having a solid foundation and dynamically learning and adapting to any situations that we need to tackle. So for instance, if that's a project where you need to build a capability in the cloud, logging and monitoring, and you need to learn about that, then do that. But don't get concerned about trying to remember and learn all the things, because no one knows all the things. That's why we have different specialists and people versed in different areas. Don't be overwhelmed by the breadth of the industry and the breadth of certain job descriptions. So the foundational skill set. So this is what I essentially think you need as an incident response consultant to really get stuck in and have a solid foundation. So at the top here, we've got Windows, and that might be fairly self-explanatory for a lot of people, but what kind of things are we looking for here in Windows? So an understanding of the file system, file structure, directories, processes, what processes spawn from certain processes, how many processes should I see? So an example would be LSAS. How many processes of LSAS am I expecting to see within a system? One usually, more than one is quite bad. And the same applies to Linux as well. So what kind of processes, services, daemons will I see running? What kind of stuff should I expect to see within RC local for persistence or anything like that? It's just a fundamental knowledge of how these operating systems work, because they span the breadth of the incidents that you'll likely look at. Windows essentially covers most endpoints, and Linux will cover most servers, web servers, and things like that. And underpinning a lot of that is obviously networking. So how protocols work. Do you understand the protocols, the status codes that they'll return? HTTP, for an example, the OSI model, and how that relates to encapsulation and decapsulation of packets, and why certain things happen in networking. So if you browse to Google, why is it that you need a DNS request to help encapsulate the packet? Why is that required? Having that fundamental knowledge of being able to explain what happens when you do things will help you understand what's wrong when certain things happen, or spotting bizarre behavior. Because if you don't know the underlying operating systems, then how can you hope to find anything bad? So essentially, it's just that core foundation: Linux, Windows, networking. And additionally, we've got incident management. So what does that mean? So obviously, you've got that technical background there on endpoints and networking, but we also need to be able to run through an incident quite well and have a process that we follow during an incident. So there's different frameworks out there. Some popular ones are ones by NIST or SANS. You've probably heard things like containment, identify, recovery, and eradication. So if you turn up to an incident, you've got an idea in your head or a process that you can follow to help get a client back up and running as fast as possible. And inside of that management is obviously the crisis management and the conversations that you have with the client. which is critical and falls onto the outlier here. So not many people, when they start to think about incident response roles, actually think about this one, talking to people, which is critical. And we'll talk about it a bit more in depth on the next slide, but don't forget that you need to be able to talk to people quite well as well. So here's our foundation: Windows, networking, Linux, incident management. That's the core of what you'll need. So if you've got a strong base in that, chances are you could likely go for an incident response role. You don't need everything. You don't need to be a PHP master. You don't need to be a malware reverse engineer god. You just need this solid foundation, which you can move from. Strong foundation, build the rest. So I mentioned the skills there and foundational tool sets, as it were, but I haven't mentioned anything about data acquisition then yet, and how that kind of fills the gap between a SOC analyst and a DFAR consultant, because that's a missing gap usually, isn't it? Most SOC analysts don't really do much data acquisition. And of course, we've got our friend Morpheus there. So what if I told you that not every endpoint requires a full disk image? And what does that mean? So on the outside, most people probably think that a lot of DFAR consultants just do a disk image of everything they get their hands on. But the reality is that's not very efficient, it's not fast, and it's very time consuming and prone to errors potentially. So normally what will actually happen is a triage of data. So we know the critical data that we need to grab to help us identify things. You know, it's helped by many different resources and industry knowledge. You know, for example, we've got SANS cheat sheets to help us identify persistence artifacts, execution artifacts. So if you know where they are, then we can grab that data straight away. We don't need to do a full disk image, which means that 90% of the time in incident response, you won't really do full disk images. You'll do triage of data instead. And just another point, that data acquisition within incident response is usually the easiest part of it. So it's nothing to get stressed out about too much if you have not done much of it before. And as a SOC analyst, without really knowing, you do spend a lot of your time already looking at these data sets within EDR tools. Most SOC analysts have got exposure to EDR tools such as CrowdStrike and Carbon Black. And those particular tools, you might not realize it, but are taking you through these data sets. So process information, which you'd find in a memory capture, file artifacts that you'd find within a disk image that you're looking at in Carbon Black or CrowdStrike. You know, looking at certain sensitive folders within Windows, System32, config that contains a registry. You already spend a lot of your time looking at that. So the analysis capabilities are there. The gap between just grabbing that data in a raw format and then analyzing it in whichever tools you have, that's just probably the main concern that most people are missing there. But that analysis, which is the harder part, is definitely there. It's just that data acquisition bit that you can practice. There are many open source tools that you can use to perform your own data acquisition at home. So if you've never done a disk image, just grab an old laptop and do an image of it. Just practice it, go through the motions, and you'll feel more comfortable doing that. Take memory captures, break and test any equipment you're willing to do so at home. Obviously, don't do the main laptop that you're using, but tools and resources exist out there to help you, including triage. So for anyone that's not really too aware, triage is essentially grabbing key critical data that we know provides tangible value to an investigation, such as a registry and things like that. And there are tools that can do that for you as well, such as CAPE, Cyler, which is spelled CYLR. And essentially these tools just grab the data sets for you, output it to whatever disk you have, a USB of some kind. So then rather than doing a full disk image, you've essentially grabbed the data you want, and then you're ready to look at it and move from there. So you won't be disk imaging every host. So this bit relates to non-technical skills versus Uber tech lords. And you might be wondering, well, what the hell do you mean with that? And why is there a spaghetti bowl there? Well, I do like imagery. but this essentially relates to the ability to convey your technical knowledge to a client without their eyes glazing over and the brain turning to spaghetti. And it's often overlooked. And obviously, at a deep technical level, a certain amount of experience and knowledge is required. But if you can't turn that spaghetti to a signal, then you're going to leave the client frustrated. And if you're frustrated and you don't understand something, you stop listening, don't you? You don't really care what that person's starting to talk about. But if that's an incident response consultant and they're trying to help you bring your business back online, it's going to cause a break in the whole process. So essentially what Brian Cox is to physics or David Attenborough to nature in the world, you need to be able to convey in simple terms and simple steps what a client will need to do as best and easily as you can. But the easier that is, the happier and more comfortable a client will be, which means they'll be aligned with you in the recovery steps and process that you need to take. So there's two sides to this. Yes, you could be really technical, but if you don't have great soft skills or the ability to talk to people, you'll likely struggle until you get experience doing that. But on the other offside, you'll have people who are more better at doing incident management and talking to clients. Now, those particular outliers may be separated in some companies where you have incident managers and then you have the technical people as separate roles. That might not always be the case. It might be conjoined, which is why you still need the ability to talk to stressed clients or board members in a simple, relative manner that makes sense to them, whilst keeping the business in mind. So it's something to think about, something to consider. It's all well and good being really technical, but you still need to be able to talk in simple terms. So if you've ever really done much networking, you've probably heard the analogy of explaining how the internet works to your parents, because you're trying to explain something deeply technical to someone that's likely not technical. And if you can walk away from them having to explain how the internet works, you browse to Google what happens from that. If you can explain that to them, then you're probably at a good base to actually move into incident response. Just because you can convey advanced topics into simple conversation for a client or your parents. Don't tell them I did it or told you to go and talk to your parent about how the internet works. So obviously not every hour of your work will be filled with incidents. It's not uncommon for IR teams to go for long stretches where they don't actually have any incidents. So you might be thinking, well, what else might I be doing? And depending on the company you work for, you may be asked to perform other types of work, generally referred to as consultancy work, which means a lot of your time as an IR consultant or a consultant will be a mix of incidents and consultancy tasks. And a key thing to take away from this is outside the silo of the SOC, you'll have valuable experience and skills which can be utilized elsewhere in the industry, meaning more exposure for you as an individual to parts of the cybersecurity industry that you wouldn't have thought were possible. So I've listed some examples of consultancy work you may be exposed to. Cybersecurity capability building. So a client approaches you and they say, our cybersecurity is not very good. We want to improve and make it better. How can we do that? Segment the network, implement MFA. You start thinking about things like this and conveying that to the client and helping them build. So you've kind of gone from just looking at logs, alarms, to applying the knowledge you have to another area that you might not have thought was possible, which is great for you as an individual and for your development and expose you to a larger area of the industry. And then we've got training and development, speaks for itself really. Training courses or any awareness that you raise around things, you could end up doing that. Configuration reviews for devices, firewalls, web apps. If you understand how things work, then usually you'll have a good grasp of the configuration that should be completed for them, especially if you've worked with certain hardware before. So for myself, I used to be a network engineer. So if someone was to give me a Cisco or a HP switch, I feel I could confidently look at the configuration for those devices and identify any outliers that need to be resolved. Speaking and presenting like I'm doing now, that's another thing you could do. And one that a lot of people tend to think about moving from a SOC analyst to is penetration testing. So depending on your company, obviously, you could potentially do penetration testing if you're capable of it and you're not on incidents. There's no reason you couldn't do penetration testing as part of consultancy work within a company. You've got the credentials, the capability, and the aptitude to do it. There's no reason you can't. Internal capability building through development and research. This is mostly just building the capability internally. So research and development on tools or ways of doing things within the business itself that you work for, and compliance and governance. So outside of incidents, you could also work on stuff like cyber essentials, any ISO certifications. There's a lot out there, and moving from the silo of a SOC does expose you to a lot more of the industry that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So on to the big question that some people are probably wondering about. Will I work every weekend and Friday afternoon? No, but you sometimes will. Obviously, it's the nature of the beast of this particular industry. You will work some weekends, you will work some Fridays, and depending on the consultancy you work for, there'll be a flexibility and a balance that you can shift in terms of your work hours and things like that. So it's part of the job. Just set the expectation. You might work some Fridays, you might work some weekends. So be prepared for that. If you're going to work as an IR consultant, it's just part of the job, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean you're doing it all the time. So you reach your first IR incident, and it doesn't go quite to plan. So you sat there panicking, you're getting stressed, and you're really anxious. And most people will be quite anxious on their first incident. It's not uncommon. Most people will probably feel a bit of anxiety when they actually go to incidents, even if they're experienced. You're meeting people you don't know. You're going to be exposed to technology stacks that you might not be completely versed on. There's a multitude of environments out there with different businesses that all do different things in different ways. So you won't know everything that you see immediately, and that might cause you a bit of stress, but that's completely fine. That's normal. The key point, remember, everyone makes mistakes at some point. It's how you build on them which matters. So normally the more mistakes you make, the more you learn, right? Just don't make too many of them, learn from them. And if you are feeling stressed or you freeze during an incident and you're not sure what to do next, you sat there with your head in your hands and your world's falling apart, that's fine. It's why you have a network behind you within your company of, different seniors, even if they're not DFAR focused. These people can help talk to you and speak to you and guide you and put you on a path to figure out what you need to do next. There's no problem with calling someone up and talking through what you need to do next. You might be overwhelmed by a client constantly asking you, how do we fix this? How do we recover from this ransomware? And it might all get to you. That's fine. Just speak to someone at work and just start to map out what you need to do. Sometimes talking to someone about that type of thing is all you need, really. And obviously, the last point there is cybersecurity it's quite a small world. So build your network with reliable and trusted friends who can help you when you have issues, whether that be mentally, technically, you're not sure about how something works, and vice versa. If you can do the same for other people, then you'll have a solid web of people that can actually help you, and it works the other way as well. So, and in the end, if it all starts falling apart, remember, this is fine. Everything will likely turn out okay. Never going to be the end of the world. So don't stress, keep moving forward and go from there. So any questions from anyone about anything in particular, whether that be anything I might not have covered, anything you might disagree with what I've said, anything of that nature, really. And again, just a nice company logo there. CYSIAM are located in Milton Keynes for anyone interested in becoming an IRT team member.
Thank you very much, Sean and Luke, for the talk. That was really interesting. If anyone has any questions, please share them with us on the application, and I will convey them to Luke and Sean. In the meantime, hey guys, maybe you can share with us your experience. Maybe at some point you two join forces together, bringing both your own skills in an incident. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, cheers, Rodrigo. I think one of the key things to point out with bringing Luke on board, when we went through the interview process and his background in networking, and I was fortunate enough that I knew Luke from his time in the military as well. But one of the key things with all incidents and best laid plans, when Luke joined, I was actually running on an incident at the same time as the day that he started. So all of the plans of getting Luke onboarded and getting him up to speed with all the tooling that we use had just gone. But it worked really well in Luke going on to the other incident, because I think that gave him a level of confidence in the skills that he already had from the SOC and his understanding of enterprise environments and how to help secure and contain an incident so that it didn't spread like wildfire throughout that environment, while me having a long screwdriver saying, oh, could you grab this, could you grab that, and send it back to me. You know, we weren't expecting Luke to come in from his SOC background and being able to do a level of host intrusion analysis and some levels of network intrusion analysis, but you know, it was tampered with. You know, he's come straight from a SOC. His skills are very acceptable at where we were at in that incident. His knowledge on operating systems, his knowledge on networking technologies, to be able to contain incidents and help strategize the recovery process and recovering to clean was invaluable at that time, because of his background in a SOC and understanding the breadcrumbs that are left during an event that precedes an incident, to finding it, to helping categorize everything so that we could work with the client properly and get them back up to speed while doing the back end of it.
Nice. Look, how was your experience being thrown at the deep end the first day at work? Tell us.
Well, obviously it is a completely different dynamic to actually working in a SOC, right? Because rather than just having data presented to you, you've got to go out and triage and grab that data and figure out what's actually relevant to you, rather than just having an alert go off, for example. But it really does give you a boost in confidence once you've first done it. Obviously, you might be apprehensive when you first jump on your first live incident like that, but once you go through the motions and you get into the groove of it, it definitely does give you a massive confidence boost to, you know, inform what you're doing and believe that, you know, you can do this and you are doing it. It just gives you that faith to really embrace what you're doing. And obviously, depending on the mindset, so I've got quite a curious mindset. So if at the time I'm not sure about how I'm supposed to do something, I'll go and research that and find a lot of joy in doing it. So, you know, with anything in the industry as a whole, you know, you come across little things or breadcrumbs or artifacts that you're not sure about. I find a lot of joy in delving into them and figuring out what they are. And that's part of why I like being in this job so much. Different every day usually, isn't it? Especially incidents. So.
And I think that point there, what Luke made about researching and staying cool, like coming from the SOC, that was evident straight away from potentially living in a day-to-day environment where there are alerts going off, criticals everywhere, to being put in an environment where you have the client and then not demanding, but, you know, hoping for the best out of you. And then he probably had me in the background going, I need this now because I want to have a look at it. just that cool head to be able to prioritize, get things right, do it right first time in time critical incidents like that, so that it wasn't I need you to go back and get a bit more of this detail or some logs from this device. Everything came because that's what he was adapted to doing in a SOC, getting the right amount of data to the right people at the right time so they can make those decisions based on that data. And that insatiable need for knowledge that guys in SOCs have and girls in SOCs in wanting to find out why that happened like that is invaluable in IR. People in security operations centers should be looking towards IR and going, that is the path for me, because my mindset is already developing towards that. So yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Guys, thanks a lot for sharing your experience with us. I'm sure it was inspiring for many people. Thanks a lot for contributing to CRESTCon. And now we are going to have a 10 minutes break. So guys, grab a cappuccino and I will see you later at 3:05. Bye for now.